Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am so excited. We got Oak coming back, we got Matt coming back, and we got Brenda coming back. This is going to be a fantastic show. Now, while I am excited, y'all should be too. Do the things, like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Wednesdays on the Gold Mine and Fridays for The Collective. Now, if you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, by all means, put them up on the comments in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show, and I am super stoked. So let's get some intros in and out of the way. We're gonna start with Oak. You're on top. Give us 10 to 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. What's
Yeah,
up?
I live in Daytona Beach, Florida, retired Lieutenant Colonel from the United States Army. Now I speak about leadership and success and working on my second book, but live here in Florida because I don't want to live through winters ever again.
Bam. Yeah, you're talking to some Canadians up here. We know all about the winter.
Yeah.
Matt, hit us up. What do you got?
I'm a former cop, strength coach, sports psychology consultant, and now is like a one-man nonprofit for first responders and vets, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health, in a more proactive manner than what we're typically doing, reactive to crisis. And I live in Southern California.
Bam. Love it. Brenda, how about yourself?
Yes, coming from the north, Dawson City, Yukon, and I'm a retired deputy commissioner with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I was the commanding officer for the British Columbia RCMP, and then I went to the province of British Columbia as the assistant deputy minister and director of police services. I retired roughly 3 years ago and then came home to my home community, and I'm working right now as an executive director for the Trondikwichin First Nation.
Bam. So no big deal. Just, hanging out. Light career here and there. Sean, how's the mountains treating you?
Things are good out here. Looking forward to this conversation. I got to say, I don't know who picked the topic, but the two are so almost polar opposites. I'll say that it's quite a fascinating couple of words, and I'm curious as to where this is going to go.
Well, let me explain. So when I posted up the question to the collective a little while ago, this was one of the answers was gratitude and resentment, and the question itself went into a little bit more of the differences between age groups and the fact that sometimes young people can lack gratitude and be full of resentment, whereas people who are older can have more gratitude, less resentment. But I figured, hey, this is a great two lines to kind of come from. So we're going to hit it right now. When you guys first heard that this was going to be the topic, gratitude and resentment, I want to get your guys' thoughts on it. What was the thing that clicked into your head first? Oak, I'm going to put you up first. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah, for me, I try to live my life being grateful for what I have, and the flip side of that, I try to be grateful to show other people how grateful I am for what they provide. So I mean, I'm human. I have resentment as well about things, but I try to keep that as low as possible. So I was excited when I found out this is what we were going to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm super stoked for this one. Brenda, what were your first thoughts?
I was excited as well. I actually find them, obviously, as Sean stated, polar opposites, but at the same time, I feel like you can't have one without the other and live those life experiences. So, for myself, I'm committed to every day in demonstrating or, expressing gratitude for everything. And at the same time, navigating through different types of resentment. So as an example, I was feeling a little resentful earlier when I was wondering whether or not the Wi-Fi was going to maintain some stability, but then grateful when it did. So, a small example, but I was absolutely excited to have this discussion.
That's awesome. Such a great example. It might be a small example, but it is a great example. Matt, what were your first thoughts?
So I didn't see it until late last night, and then I got a little bit analytical because I'm like, the gratitude thing is very easy except for when we face suffering, but there's some practices that I've done my whole life that not while I'm suffering am I grateful for it, but a lot of the times the things we're resentful for later on are the things in the rearview mirror we can be grateful for because they made us a better person to work through them. But then I got hung up on what exactly is the definition of resent or being resentful, and how does it compare, contrast to regret? And so I was trying to look up articles and read on it, and there's so many different opinions. But I also thought, how honest are all of us? Are we going to be on here about, especially in our culture, resent, like ill feelings towards something? A lot of times we have this toxic positivity, especially with social media, and everybody acts like they're super happy all the time. But the reality is, especially if you're a first responder and veteran, which I know is a lot of your community watching this, you're going to see things that are not going to make you happy. And what we do is unconsciously stuff away, say, that resentment and the uncomfortable feelings, but then that bites us in the butt if we don't deal with that type of those thoughts and feelings.
100%. That is right on the money. Sean, what were your first thoughts? I saw a picture you sent me that you took some notes.
Yeah, I took notes. I don't often do notes, but is this like the third time I've taken notes in the last 3 shows? It's ridiculous.
row,
It's turning
yeah.
into a thing. Is this a pattern? I'm not sure I like it.
Might have to
Anyway,
interrupt it.
I might have to stop it. So let me just quickly establish what I did this morning. Much like Matt, I looked at the 2 words and I thought, these 2 play well together, but they don't play well together. I've got to figure out what these 2 words mean to each other. So I went back to the etymology of each word. And Matt's right. Like, you can bounce around for the next several days finding definitions of each word, and they'll be a little bit different from the definition prior. And then 2 days later, you'll find just a little bit of a tweak on the definition of each word. But I'm just going to quickly rattle off this. This will take me 60 seconds. But I'm going to try to establish a loose framework of what the 2 words mean, at least to me. So first one up, gratitude. Gratitude comes from the Latin gratitudo, which entered into the English language in the mid-15th century. Its original definition, this is important. This is going to be important throughout the entire conversation, I feel. The original definition emphasized the feeling of thankfulness and the inclination to reciprocate kindness. The modern usage places more emphasis on the expression of appreciation rather than the internal feeling. Freaking mic drop right there. And it's not even, I didn't even come up with it. It's just the definition drops the mic on that one. The difference between the origination of what gratitude meant to how it's being not distorted, but how it's being convoluted, we'll say, for the modern usage. Now, I'll get on to resentment, which is equally fascinating to me when you look at the etymology. It comes from the French word ressentiment, derived from the Latin which means again, and sentire, which means to feel. So in other words, again, to feel. That entered into the English language in the early 17th century. The original definition was the action of feeling again. Resentment, the action of feeling again, or to feel intensely. But over time, it's come into our modern usage where it has changed to more along the lines of bitter indignation, persistent ill will, or perceived unfairness. So again, resentment kind of started off as to feel again, but now it means something quite a bit different. So of course, gratitude is a positive emotion. Resentment is a negative emotion. For gratitude, you can assign certain things like contentment, thankful, connected, goodwill for others. Whereas resentment typically means strained relationships, poor mental health, focused on perceived wrongs, and a sense of disconnection or hostility towards others. So completely different words. But in my further research this morning, even though they can be mutually exclusive, one can lead to the other if you focus correctly. Those are my first thoughts.
Bam. This is going to be a good convo. Looking forward to this already. Now, before we get too deep into it, I just want to hit on these real quick. Winterstorm jumped in here. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you, buddy. Great Dad Gear. Great morning, guys. Not just a good morning. It's a great morning. And Glenn, morning, everyone. Good to see you, buddy. And there's a question right off the bat that I want to hit you guys with. And then we can get into the rest of it. Winterstorm jumped in here and he says, why does resentment come so easily to us Well, gratitude requires work. I think this is a great place to start. So Brenda, you're on top. I'm going to put you up first here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny when we talk about some of the social negativity that is occurring, and we did talk about that a little bit before we started this discussion. It's sometimes easier to default to negativity than it is to stay in the positivity. And for me, when I think about, resentment, is that as much as we've covered the definitions, how much of that becomes competitive? How much of that becomes also like those fear-based aspects of your personality and where you're at and your own insecurities that are manifesting themselves into, the negativity, and why we end up potentially navigating more so to resentment than the positivity and the gratitude. And I also think that, complexity-wise, it's also about your surroundings, who you're surrounding yourself with, your own experiences, your own capability, your own confidence. And I also think that, the way you're raised, factors into that as well. So again, your surroundings. Those are my initial thoughts.
I'm liking where this is going. Oak, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think kind of like what Brenda was saying. I think it's mindset. There are people who are negative and they're always going to be negative, and everything is what happened to me and why did it happen to me. And, for the last 4 summers, we've had our 10-year-old now and 10-year-old granddaughter and 7-year-old grandson for the last 4 years. And when the first summer they got here and we kept them the whole month of July, our grandson kind of, he kind of had a little negative attitude, and my wife said it exactly right. Look, you can either choose to be happy or you can choose to be sad. It's your choice. I think it really does come down to that it's just your mindset. A lot of it is your mindset of how do you perceive what's going on in your life. Do you look at the positive things, or do you look at the negative things first? And I think it's just so easy to look at the negative things and blame others rather than take responsibility and try to have a positive mindset and make things good for yourself. So that's my take.
Yeah, I really like that. Matt, what do you think?
First, I agree with Oak and Brenda on a lot of their points. First thing that came to me, there's nature and nurture. A lot of neuroscientists say that our brains are wired to gravitate towards the things that we are worried and stressed out about. And that's why doing gratitude practices, different contemplative or spiritual practices are so, so important. And also the nature part, as Brenda mentioned, and Oak, like, how did your parents nourish and affirm you? And did they teach you the perspective of when something is difficult, is that a challenge to overcome, or is that a threat where you don't have accountability and responsibility? It's the teacher's fault, the coach's fault, the cop's fault, the politician's fault. It's somebody else's fault. And right now, I think the media and our culture is doing a great job of this duality of teaching us against them, tribalism, and a very victim mindset.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have very, very strong parents, I mean, why in school aren't we teaching perhaps gratitude journal, mindfulness, yoga, Tai Chi, very hard exercise, get in a circle, do something called the way of counsel, if you know what that is, but it's sharing your feelings, and nobody asks questions. Nobody gives you advice. We just recognize these are the feelings we have. I think we're just failing the younger generations, and there's research behind it from a lot of different orientations that I believe would support my hypothesis.
Interesting. I'm digging this already. Sean, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm totally down with that for sure. Everything that was just said, I'm in alignment with. I think one of the struggles when it comes to nature versus nurture is irrespective of what your nature is. And we could argue how much each person is individually wired at a nature level to be negative, we'll call it, or resentful, or struggles to have gratitude. At a nature level, maybe we're all the same, maybe we're not. Doesn't much matter to me. You can nurture that into someone, or you can nurture that out of someone. I think that it can be built or destroyed. And so, I look at this panel as an example, or myself as an example. And I think one of our jobs is for the younger generation, to Matt's point, is to display gratitude in a way that vibes with a younger generation. And so for me, as an example, like kumbaya doesn't work for me. Unicorns and rainbows doesn't work for me. But what does work for me is some freaking hard charger out there who just sits down and has a little namaste moment and represents in a cool way, whatever that means to me at this phase of my life, represents in a cool way how to be grateful. Grateful for the moment, grateful for their life, grateful for their friends, grateful for their education, grateful for their professions, grateful for the future. How to do that as leaders within our spaces, or as people in the phase of our life where we're supposed to represent what is human potential. I think it's our job to do these kind of things. And so we're literally doing it right now in this conversation. We're going to, for the next hour and a half, try to put across our points, put across our ideas, our wisdom of others, so that a younger generation can understand how important it is to be grateful, to demonstrate gratitude. And I didn't when I was young, because it wasn't even a frickin' word when I was coming up. Gratitude wasn't part of my language. Smashing things was part of my language. And so gratitude is, I won't say it's a new thing to me, but it's certainly not been in my life my entire time. So, I'm sure for all of us, there's been phases in our life where we had more gratitude and we had less gratitude, and that's going to be part of the conversation today.
Yeah. I think it really has, personally, I think it comes back to intentionality, or I think resentment is easy because it's a selfish thing, right? It's easy to be selfish and be like, well, how come it's happening to me? And blah, blah, blah. And I have this story as you guys were talking, it kind of clicked in my head. When I was on my PLQ in out in Wainwright, we were sitting in the middle of a field waiting on some stuff to come down, some orders to come down or something like that. And it was a crummy day, and it was cloudy, and it was cold, but it wasn't cold enough to like wear big gear. So we were kind of, hovering on that edge of being cold and just uncomfortable all day. And my fire team partner and I were just kind of hanging out there. And all of a sudden we got hit by this sunbeam just out of nowhere. And it was like just centered over top of him and I. And we could have been very resentful in the moment and just been like, oh, this is garbage and I hate being here and blah, blah, blah. But we made the choice to be a little bit intentional, and we looked at each other and we're like, you know what? Small victories in Wainwright. And just that one moment of gratitude kind of allowed the day to unfold. And then later on within the course, we saw a chipmunk at one of our OPs, something like that. But again, we intentionally took that as a gratitude moment. Like, cool, man, look at that chipmunk go. That's awesome. And I think this is part of the conversation that leads into my first question here, which is developing gratitude, like cultivating it within yourself and within your careers. How has that, or let me rephrase this, how has cultivating your gratitude influenced your ability to handle your careers? Because you've all gone through very stressful and challenging careers. So I'm wondering, how has cultivating gratitude influenced your ability to handle those careers? I'm going to start with Matt on this one. What do you think?
Well, if we're speaking of like police work, but even what I'm doing now is, like you said, intention for gaining insight and learning lessons from whatever comes my way. And in sports psychology and in spiritual theology, they talk about perspective. So is your perspective like, woe is me, the victim mindset, this is a threat, or hey, even if I didn't cause this, this is like really challenging and difficult. And right now I might recognize feelings of resentment, but what am I going to do with it? And it's kind of like a hard workout. Sometimes like football camp's hard, or you want to get a bigger bench. It's hard. You got to do hard work to work through it and get to the other side and accomplish your goal. So we also need to define I believe, just my opinions, what are your values and how do you find meaning and purpose? Because if you're in the military, you're a cop, you're a firefighter, and you can't continue to find meaning and purpose, and you're seeking just happiness or pleasantries, like you're going to end up self-medicating all this unconscious resentment or uncomfortable feelings from things that often do make people uncomfortable, like seeing other people suffer or going through challenges. So having the insight and intention to grow and defining your values and how you find meaning and purpose so you can change your perspective, and then have a practice. And there's something called the Ignatian Examine, the daily examine, where you reflect on every day and you see, where was my battery getting recharged? Where was I finding meaning and purpose with these different people, places, and things? Where was my battery being drained? And reflect on how I can learn a lesson from this, and how can I do this situation or this person or whatever it is better the next time I'm confronted with it.
I love that. Brenda, thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I have a number of thoughts, and from a very young age, like I can't remember if I shared this previously or not, but like I grew up in a lot of familial violence as well as community as a whole, right? So there was a tremendous amount of that and the exposure to it. And early on, I was fortunate enough to have an uncle who, had he just had a lot of resilience, and I was able to benefit from that. And so part of it as well was just being able to understand who I was as a young individual growing up in these dynamic types of situations. And it was very easy to say, well, why am I here? Why am I in the situation? At the same time, his influence was such that, okay, it happened, but what do we do about it? And I think that creating that foundation and being curious about myself, as well as why the situations were happening within my community, and also being curious about how I could participate in a healthier way, so that it's what led me into my career path of policing or public safety. That very much precipitated those life choices. I also think that for me, it's very much, as Matt has said, it's understanding my own personal values and what that means to me, having a lot of fire in my personality, so passion, and being able to use that in a healthy way. I also think that introspection is pretty critical. And, when you take on these big roles of responsibility and you have so much influence, with the people that you work with on a regular basis, or whatever that looks like for yourself and your individual careers, and even with your circle of friends and family, it's really about being the light in that situation for me, and always taking that to heart and recognizing that it's about, that servitude, mentorship, leadership, but doing it in a way that if I've done the work, then I have that ability to be that light, and that I'm not, harboring any of the issues or challenges that I've faced, that I've been able to work through that in the best way possible. And that's why gratitude for me, it is very much with feeling. It's very much about, it's harvesting season. So, I know that we're going to be going out here tomorrow or even later tonight and looking for a moose, and, being able to be grateful for that and give back to community and share that with whomever else may be in need of it. So, I think that being able to work on it daily as well has also helped provide resiliency for myself through my professional career. And again, being in that situation and leadership position where I've always wanted the best for the people that I've worked with, because they're tough positions. And, when you're constantly bombarded with negativity, that it's that much more of a need to be in a gratitude or a grateful mindset.
I could not agree more with that, and especially there's nothing not as much of a great feeling as being able to harvest something and then share it with your community. That is just such an amazing feeling. Oak, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. I think I agree with a lot of what was already said. I think, it starts with your values. One of the things I always say is you look at where you want to be in life, but you got to remember what your values are and what you come from. Because it doesn't do any good. You're not going to be happy if you achieve what you think you want to be or where you want to do what you want to do if you don't like who you are when you get at the end of that journey. So you got to always bring it back to your values. And I think a huge part of this is the intention piece in decision making, in figuring out what it is that you really want with your passion, with your goals and all that. What is it that you really want? And my father used to say all the time, look, son, life is about decisions and consequences, because every decision you make has a consequence. Some are good, some are bad. You got to get to the point where you're making good decisions that give you good consequences, which will help you be more grateful, more the gratitude part. And like Brenda said, then, you know, you're the light, you're the person who has hope, who has, you know, Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. That's what leaders do. And you can't do that if you don't understand who you are and what you want to do. And I think that, you know, one of the things I've had my hand in commission over 600 lieutenants for the United States Army. And one of the things I always told every single one of them as I was recruiting them, the last thing I told them was, look, you got to understand what you're asking for here. You got to, which goes back to Matt talking about, you know, what's your expectations of what job you're getting into. I said, you got to understand what you're asking for here. You're asking to join a profession as a leader where you can make all the right decisions. You can do everything right, and somebody still might die. If you can't handle that, go do something else, because that's what you're asking for. And some left, never came back, and some did come back. But I always wanted to make sure they understood what they were asking for coming through the Army ROTC, hoping to be a lieutenant, an officer in the United States Army. So I think that is key to me, understanding who you are and using that along your journey to make sure you stay on the path that you're going to like who you are when you get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to keep those expectations clear. Sean, thoughts on this?
Yeah, my first career, military. Again, gratitude really wasn't part of our language. It certainly wasn't part of our spoken language. And I didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about gratitude, so it wasn't part of my internal language. But like Oak said, you know, as leaders, when I was a young buck, my leaders, they were dealers in hope. They'd provide hope to some degree. But much like the two words that we're discussing today, gratitude and resentment, are kind of mutually exclusive from each other. They're kind of polar opposites. Well, to understand how to deal hope, you've got to have faced some despair. It's context. You can't do one well unless you face the other one well. And so for someone to guide me through an adverse career path who hasn't sensed some despair themselves, but now they're trying to teach me hope, that doesn't really work for me. The Army worked for me because it's an extremely adverse environment, which provides people the experiences where they can learn deep lessons or deep wisdom. And so I look at this gratitude aspect, and the first thing that bubbles up in my mind is, as Matt said, you kind of got to have purpose in the military. If you want to stay in the game, and if you want to do it well, your purpose has got to be so strong or so righteous that you take it all the way through to the finish line. And so that was taught to me, that sense of purpose. And I've managed to understand that for the rest of my life. But the gratitude aspect, we kind of reverse Uno carded that. So we weren't gratitude-ish, much like you, Chance, in the times where, and there's been a number of times where it hasn't been like super awesome. In those moments, what we, at least the guys I was with, we didn't sit around and think, man, that chipmunk is so cute. What we thought was, well, at least it ain't raining chipmunks on us right now. So it was always the classic case of it can always be worse. Mm-hmm. So our gratitude wasn't, oh, this is awesome. Look, that we just got hit by some sunshine. That's not how we talked. What we did think was, man, it's cold out right now. I hope that we don't get hit by an iceberg. And so it was always taking it to the nth degree or taking the adverse situation and thinking, well, it can always be worse. Oh, here it comes. It just got worse. And so that was kind of our MO. We'd look at the problem that we were in, and we would look around at each other and think, well, we faced worse, or it can always be worse. It might get worse. So that's kind of how we dealt with gratitude, the reverse Uno card.
I love that. Yeah, what do you got, Matt?
So something popped in my mind is if people out there aren't familiar with the research on post-traumatic growth, and a good organization that does retreats and is now doing post-traumatic growth training for peer support teams for first responders and military units is called Boulder Crest. The book is Struggle Well by Ken Falk, and their first responder program is called Struggle Well. Their military stuff's Boulder Crest, Warrior Path. And they have the professor, who I don't want to butcher his name, who coined the phrase post-traumatic growth. And he did research on Vietnam veterans. And if I were to ask the audience or you guys, who do you think had higher rates of PTSD? The American aviators that for months or years were in captivity, or the grunts on the ground?
I would say the grunts myself.
Me too.
Okay. Are you guys?
I'm going with the grunts.
All right. What is the reasoning for that? Usually people think the flip, the people that have been in the POW camp.
For me, I mean, this is fuzzy math that I had to do in a split second, but I just simply established that if you're a POW, like in Hotel Hanoi or some such thing, and you're in a rhythm, you're in your battle rhythm of your day to day. Your day consists of a known. It doesn't mean that it's good, but you have an understanding of how your day unfolds, and you kind of get used to the insane adversity, and you normalize the abnormal. And through normalizing that abnormal, you can get it to the end of the day, and then you can get into the next day, and so on and so forth. And life, I believe, this is the reason I made my decision. In that moment, your life is to some degree simple, because even though it's bad, and even though there is some chaos in it, it's not the chaotic unknown of the grunt on the battlefield who was in a 360 chaos of the unknown every single second. And so I simply established it as the known rhythm versus the unknown void of chaos.
Yeah, I have a book actually on my bookshelf back here, and it is Vietnam. It's like this thick, and it goes from like 700 BC to now on. It gives us the whole breadth of it, and a lot of it that they talked about in that book was the fact that the average grunt rarely saw the enemy. They were just constantly being bombarded, and the aviators that were in the Hanoi Hilton, they had an enemy in front of them every day, and they could see, and they could work, and they could they could focus their efforts in what they're doing every single day. That's what I've read on it. Oak, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think those are exactly right. I think it was for the grunt. It was that daily unknown. Every step I took, didn't know if that was going to be your last step, and how was it going to be? Was somebody going to shoot at me? Was it going to be a tripwire? Was it going to, you just never knew what was going to happen, and there was a study done why, the difference between World War II infantrymen and Vietnam infantrymen, and, the number of days that World War II infantrymen actually saw combat was insignificant compared to every day that the Vietnam soldiers pretty much saw combat, some type of combat, some kind of hostility. So I think it was just that day in, day out of unknown, like Sean said, just that unknown of what's coming next. I think that will just draw on you. I think a lot worse than knowing, okay, I'm a prisoner and I know it sucks, but at least I know what's coming tomorrow, pretty much. Same as I'm doing today. Might be a beating, it might be whatever, but it's going to be the same pretty much. So that's my take on it.
Yeah.
I would encourage you guys, because they do use people from the Hanoi Hilton, and this stuff was brutal. And in America, it's called Sears.
Oh, yeah.
I went through survival, evasion, resistance, escape. And we saw videos and studied all that stuff. And it's horrible. And why it came up as far as in this conversation, and post-traumatic growth is something that I think all of us should study, because it's a shift in perspective about the adversities and hardships in our lives. But of course, nobody would want to be a POW for 5 years and 8 years or even a month. But a lot of those guys can say now that although I would never wish that upon anyone, to be tortured and beaten and starved, like, I'm a better person for having gotten through it. And there's a lot of other reasons, including the community of the other aviators, to be like, hey, I broke too. I gave information. They had the tapping system, and to go through hardship with other people. But I think maybe civilians and people that aren't familiar with it, if you were to show them, the research and interviews of what happened to these POWs, then ask them if they would be grateful for it, they'd be like, no way. Or you meet people that battle through cancer, and then they turn around and say, you know what, like, that sucked. I'd wish it upon no one, but I'm grateful for it because working through it made me a better person. So anyways, I think that's why it kind of came up for me, is how we're tying in. Like, I'm sure when you learn that you have cancer, your plane gets shot down, you're not like, awesome, I'm gonna learn and grow from this and be happy about it, but you still have to have that intention.
Yeah, absolutely. Brenda, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation for sure. And, I agree with everything that said. I think like that constant state of hypervigilance, right? We know the effects that arise from that, and how challenging that becomes, not only to, your overall wellness, like your entire psyche, but also, how that ends up manifesting within all of your personal relationships and so forth. So I think that I'm always mindful of not repeating everything that's been said already as well. So, for me, I just very much agree with what's been said. And I also think that, your own, again, resiliency factors into it, right? And I also appreciate the discussion around post-traumatic growth. I think that is something in terms of the mindset and, the ability to move from a resentful type of view on life to, gravitating to gratitude. I think that's important. I think that, not only learning about it, but also, again, providing space for others to participate in the different training and coaching, as well as, having their own life journeys being spoken about, but also contributing to, peer groups, I think is important as well. So I'm just going to pause.
Love it.
Yeah,
John?
I think,
Oak, what do you got?
Yeah, Chance. I think, Matt brought up reflection. And I think that that's one of the things that we don't do a good job of. Leaders don't do a good job of it. People in general, I don't think, do a good job of it. I hear all the time as I'm out talking about leadership, and people will say, well, I learned a lot from that experience. And I said, no, you didn't. You don't learn anything from experience, because it's full of emotion. You learn from the reflection on that experience is how you learn. And I think that that's, I think it's mindset, that what can I take out of this? Even when it was horrible, there's still something good that I can learn from it or take out of it to make me a better person, to get me through that horrible period. But it all comes down to reflection and mindset as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I could not agree more. That's going to be where we go on this next question here, and I just want to get there in a second. But Sean, what do you got?
Got a little twist, just a tiny
little one?
twist, just a little stir of the pot. So not to paint too broad of a brush stroke on the entire subject, I want to throw this at everyone. So the grunt on the ground who was facing chaos, of course, that is fraught with all kinds of issues. But there are certain individuals that we'll call it perhaps the early special forces units that were formed up in Vietnam. I think that those characters, those individuals, enjoyed the chaos. I love the chaos, man. I mean, I don't want to know what's up. I just want to get across the wire and go get into the void and thrive in the chaos. What is hard for me is boring, where nothing's going on, where I'm just supposed to namaste for another 10 years. I need the chaos. And when I say I need, it's what I prefer. If I didn't get chaos, then I'd find a way to satisfy my life energy in another way. But there's certain individuals out there, whatever percentage of the population, it's small, but they would love to be in that chaos rather than be in the Hanoi Hilton. And so that monotonous, and I'm using loose terms here. Please, nobody get offended. Obviously, it wasn't monotonous in the Hanoi Hilton, but the repetitive, predictable, years and years long of very little input and a lot of beatings, that day after day would, that might break me. Whereas, and I'm not saying it would, but it might. Whereas the chaos might not break me. So I love the chaos, and there's people like me who love the chaos. And so it's not just a big old white brush that we're painting the entire subject on. There are some nature aspects to this conversation as we started off with versus the nurture aspect of it.
I think specifically for you, Sean, you enjoy the chaos because you get to play with it. I think that's the key. And I think, we had John Stryker Meyer on here, who's one of the MacBSOG guys, and he's talked very similarly in this before of like the fact that it wasn't so much that the chaos bothered him. It wasn't so much that he wanted to be able to make the choices himself. He didn't like the fact that other people were making choices for him. So if he got out in the bush, he made the plan. He made he dealt with whatever came up. And I think that's part of it.
And it's the same I was on a podcast with Dick Winters, who was also MacBSOG, and great dude, great book. And so he was very much wired like John, like Stryker. And, it's not, I don't know what the percentage of humans out there in the population base are wired like that, but there just are individuals like that,
Yeah, there's not many.
Well, what do you guys think? Is on Sean's point, is there a way to nurture that? Is there a way to kind of develop those people, especially within jobs that may require a bit of monotony, like policing or military? There's going to be times where you got to sit around and hang out. You're going to be waiting for orders, or you're going to be engaging in some, I'm not going to say meaningless tasks, but less priority taskings that they're not going to like. So managing people like that.
And there are some meaningless tasks that you do. Let's be honest. I mean, so I think you're right. And I think, I think we try to train people that for what the chaos, but then we also understand that there's going to be times when there isn't going to be chaos. And, and those people like you, Sean, and like those others you mentioned, those are the ones who get in trouble when there's no chaos.
I have peeled so many potatoes.
Matt, what do you got?
Well, I mean, to some degree, I want to say, just in my experience and meeting lots of people, whether that's elite athletes, special operators, CEOs, very competitive people that may quote like the chaos, like at some point, because to some degree you're burning the candle at both ends. At some point, life changes, whether you ask for it or not. And then there's a transition, and that's where, I'm not saying you, Sean, but like some people leave the chaos, and that's when the alcoholism, the domestic violence, the PTSD, the suicidal ideation kicks in, because they no longer have chaos. And I think you mentioned something like you will then find the chaos. But because we don't train people for these transitions, and I'm speaking even athletes and men in general that are competitive in their careers, they retire or you get hurt and you leave the NFL, or you get hurt in your military or police or fire career ends, people go off the deep end and end up in rehab or killing themselves.
That's a great point.
Can I jump on that? Because it's
Sure.
fucking such
Hit
a
it.
great thought. It's so insightful. I agree with you, Matt. And so I do love the chaos. And when there's no chaos, I go find my own chaos. Do you know what this is? What we're doing right now? Podcasting is chaos to me. So, I left tier 1 and then I found, I tried to do the hardest thing I could do, which was try to become a computer system engineer because I didn't think I was that smart. And so I started cracking the books and challenged myself. Do I have a brain? Well, as it turns out, I did. So once I figured that out, I was on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so, I gave away 15 years of high performance race coaching and 24-hour solo racing and becoming a world champion in order to do podcasting. And it's not because racing was getting boring, but I kind of had it figured out. And so I'd still be doing my coaching thing if not for people asking me to start podcasting. But when I looked at the problem, here's what I thought. Oh man, this is going to change my life in such a big way. Like, I don't want this. I've got a good life. I'm drinking coffee. I'm riding my bike. I'm working with athletes. No one knows about me. This is cool as hell. And then once I realized I was going to have to have a public facing image and start talking to microphones and exposing my thoughts, my brain, my way of life, it was extremely uncomfortable. And so this is chaos for me right now. And it's taken, I guess, over 1,000 public appearances like this for me to be comfortable in it, but never happy being in it. I am in the chaos as we speak right now. It's just, it doesn't appear to be chaotic to anyone out there, perhaps. But internally, I've got all the gratitude for the fact that I'm still in front of the microphone today. So, we create our own chaos from the external perspective. It might not look like it's scary or a wild into the void adventure, but for me, podcasting is. So I think there's always a way to meet our needs without having to get into the negative aspects, as Matt stated, with alcohol or drugs or all the various vices that try to fill that gap of chaos. I chose to find a positive way to enter into the chaos. And I'm not saying that I never drank, because I drank like a fish when I was a young buck. I was a functioning alcoholic, no doubt. But I didn't know any better. Now I know better. And that's the way of life, I think. As you move through it, you figure it out. And they're all branching decisions. Make the right call, make the wrong call. And so I've always tried to make the right call, and that's what's got me in front of the microphone.
I think that's most of the military is functional alcoholics. That's a tough place
First
to be.
responders as well.
First responders, yeah, exactly.
And what's the commonality? There's a lot of commonalities: exposure to trauma, addiction to adrenaline, the positive camaraderie. There's a lot of good things, but you're also cumulative trauma as well as big critical incidents, and we're not teaching people how to deal with them or how to transition out. And I cut you off, Chance, but there's something out there in Jungian psychology and spirituality. They call it the second half of life. And there's a good audio book by James Hollis called Through the Dark Wood. I just want to throw out a couple resources. So if people are out there, how do you do that transition? And how do you find meaning and purpose like you have, Sean, through podcasting? The lessons I learned as a tier 1 operator, how I've grown as a person, what's my new mission, and how can I apply lessons learned in this new season of life, where it may not be as externally chaotic and being in combat, but I'm giving back to the community with the lessons I learned through the hardships and the good things about being an operator. So James Hollis, Through the Dark Wood, or any of his books on the second half of life, and free on Audible is a book called Soulcraft by a psychologist named Bill Plotkins. And that talks about discharging our loyal soldiers, which is a whole other topic about related, it's an analogy to military service, where we have all these patterns in our life, but at some point we have to thank those loyal soldiers for getting us this far and discharge them and create new patterns for a new season of life to find meaning and purpose in a different environment.
Yeah. That's a great point. I remember hearing a quote a long time ago, and it was the fact that everyone has two lives, and your second life begins when you realize that you only have one. And it's a great point. But Brenda, any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to throw a Seb quote at you because he used to
Nice.
say this to me quite frequently. It's funny how those that have made a living out of chaos do the best under pressure. And so, I have to agree with Sean. Like, I don't do well bored ever, and so I don't go necessarily out to create my own chaos, although I'm certainly known to stir the pot, when I'm completely bored. At the same time, I do think, though, that, there's a time and a place for it. And I think that those that are in public safety or in the different realms that we have found ourselves, that you're drawn to that, right? I mean, because not every day is mundane. Like, even if you're sitting in the office or if you have an administrative role or whatever the case may be, yes, so there's some grinding that might happen. But overall, it's about how are you finding things to do. So even if the position or job is mundane, as I was mentioning, it's how do you find the things that are going to bring fire to that position, and that you're able to generate that within yourself as well as others. And I find that for me, the environment that I'm still working in, there's chaos within it, right? You've got intergenerational trauma, you have all these other aspects to it, but it's about finding a pathway where I'm able to still influence, the youth that I work with on a daily basis, and create a culture for them and work within the culture that we have as a First Nation, but also, understanding who they are and the different strengths that they bring. And some of them are very much within that mindset of despair, and to be able to shift them out of that, because alcohol and drugs and addictions and so forth are, they're prevalent. But to be able to provide support in the best way possible and have them understand that, as they're digging deep into themselves and finding, what's driving them or what that fire is within themselves, that you're able to do that in the best way possible. So, I think it transcends itself all the way through your life. And I do appreciate the perspective of, there's, the two lives that you live, the one that, you live until you realize that you only have the one to live. I very much appreciate that. And I think that, pardon me, my pup just came into the room. I do think that it's also about, the discussion with respect to resentment and gratitude. And I just go back to, yes, the mindset's there, but it's also about doing the work and really taking advantage of, the books that are available, the audio podcasts, and all those other aspects of it, and really investing it. And it's not easy work. I think that, when we talk about the different journeys that we've all had, like, it takes time and effort to do the introspection and the willingness to do that. And I think recently, about 10 weeks ago, I had this mishap. I was shooing a dog off the lower deck, and I misstepped, and I went down 7 flights of stairs and head planted on my driveway and ended up with a concussion. And as I'm trying to pick myself up off the driveway, knowing that I've got, some injuries all over the place, including forehead, down my entire face, into, everywhere else, two thoughts occurred to me. The dog's still coming up the driveway, so, I was able to finally get myself up and move it off, and then make sure that I'm relatively okay, that I haven't, sustained any major injuries, and then come back into the house and, take care of myself. And the initial thing was like, seriously, of course this happens, because yes, I do have a little bit of, a klutziness to me, if you will, but at the same time I thought, okay, well, it did happen. So what is it that I'm being taught, or what are the lessons that I'm supposed to learn with this? Make sure that I'm obviously navigating these stairs in a good way, and I'm not just going head first into the driveway, but it's also about slow down and, be mindful of foot placement, as well as, take time for me. And there was a whole healing journey on that. Obviously it's hard to for me to move away from reading and screen time and all the rest of it. But if you don't take that time and you don't make that effort, your recovery becomes protracted, right? So I just think, again, it's about, yes, I could have wallowed in the fact that this happened, but I chose not to. I chose to realize that it did happen. I wasn't happy about it. It slowed my life down, but that's probably what needed to happen in the first place, so that I could have that reset for myself. And again, be in the best mindset that I can be in order to influence, the different individuals that I work with. So chaos is always fascinating to me. I'm coming full circle here. It's always fascinating to me, and working within it. And again, hope, light, and all those great aspects of influence that we have on others.
I just absolutely love this, and it goes right into a question that I had for you guys that I got this set up, and I'm going to come at this because, interestingly enough, when Sean put this out early on, was the fact that gratitude and resentment are almost mutually exclusive, almost. But there are lots of times in life where you can experience both at the same time, right? As you just said, Brenda, and the fact that like you can be resentful. Oh man, I'm klutzy. Why did this happen to me? But also gracious, like, oh man, that this taught me something. Maybe I should learn from it. So I'm wondering, can you guys describe a time when you felt both resentment and gratitude at the same time? And then, as Brenda just did, how did you reconcile those emotions? Oak, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there certainly is times that where you can feel both at the same time, and they play on each other, and you get benefit from one to the other, and from that one to the back. I'm trying to think of a time when I know I had a time like that, but I'm trying to think about when it was.
I can come back to you if you want.
Yeah, let me think about it for a minute, because I do believe that is possible. Absolutely.
No problem. Matt, any thoughts on this?
I got a bunch, and I just want to go back and I want to reiterate a bunch of things that Brenda said that I think are absolutely super important and universal truths that we are not focusing on in our current culture. Doing the work, it's not easy work. When the chaos or whatever happens, what's the lesson to learn? Slow down, be mindful, choose not to wallow, and have the best mindset I can to grow myself. Speaking as Brenda's growing through this, what do I have to do to heal and influence others around me? That is the hero's journey. That is the second half of life. Like almost quite literally, whether Brenda just read books on those things or not, just through her life experience, she just expressed such an important concept that we are not teaching people. So I'm so thankful for Brenda for being like a mentor to the people that she's around, and like a positive influence on her community. Because I mean, spiritually speaking, and some orientations of psychology, we learn our greatest lessons through two avenues: great love or great suffering. And that might be where you have the resentment, the intense feelings around things that are not pleasant, but you work through the emotional, psychological, spiritual, physical pain, but you come out the other side with lessons and stronger, and you're a better person, even if you still have a scar from whatever those experiences are. So I urge people to look at their life and the highs and the lows, and see what lessons did I learn, and are there some relationships or experiences I have where I still have anger and bitterness and frustration? Well, maybe you need to go back and say, what lessons can I still learn from this, so I can then integrate it into my life and move forward without as much resentment, and be grateful for the lessons that I did learn. And that is part of what dealing with trauma is. For some experts say, it's not like healing the trauma, it's integrating the trauma. And I believe, right, there's going to be some resentment through trauma. It's not pleasant to deal with trauma, but you're going to have to lean into that pain and discomfort, learn the lessons, and then say, maybe like I can be thankful that I got these gifts, just like Brenda expressed. This season of life might be a time to slow down and be a little mindful and more present. And what an influence she's going to have on others by walking the talk through this adversity that she faced.
Love it. Love it. Oak, I'm going to come back to you. You got thoughts?
Yeah, I do. And I think soldiers would understand this. We get deployed, when I first got my first big deployment, Desert Shield, Desert Storm, dating myself there, but Desert Shield, Desert Storm, my wife was still on active duty. She was an Army nurse. We had our 18-month-old son, and she was 7 months pregnant. And so I get the orders, we're going to Saudi Arabia. Don't know when coming back, don't know how long we're going to be there. So, I mean, certainly there was some resentment there that I wasn't going to be there for the birth of my daughter, and, was going to miss the time watching my son grow up even more. But yet I was still grateful that I got to be a part of that, because there were lots of soldiers who wished they were going there, because like Sean has, we that's what we want to do. That's what we joined for, was to be part of that chaos, to do that piece of it. And then, then you come back, and I really thought for sure that my daughter wouldn't even come to me, because she had never even seen me. And that my 18-month-old son, who by then was over 2 years old, 2.5 almost, would not come to me. And then they did. So, both those times I was kind of resentful and grateful. And then coming back, I had the thought I was going to be resentful, because I thought my family wasn't going to accept me back in right away or at all. And then was very grateful when they did. So I think, on several deployments, that was probably the hardest one, because of the young age of the kids. And it was the first one, where I knew I was going to be gone for a long time, didn't know when I was coming back. So I think that was probably, those type of things is what comes to mind. But I absolutely agree with Matt and Brenda. To me, and I'm at that age now, I retired from my Army job, and now I'm in my third career, I guess some would say. But I was Army. In the first part, it was all about leading people. That was my passion. And I think that's what it comes down to, is you got to find your passion, whatever that is, in whatever part of life you're in. My passion as a young man and middle-aged man was to lead people, defend the Constitution, whatever, lead people. Now it's to teach people those lessons that we've learned, like Matt said, all those things that we learned through life, through our journey. Now it's to teach other people that. I just turned 61 in January, and one of my buddies here in Daytona said, because I love to fish, that's how I recharge my battery. That's one of the ways. And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" He said, "Why are you traveling all over the United States, all over the world talking?" He said, "Just go fishing." I said, "I can't, because that's not my passion. I love to fish, but my passion is to pass on these lessons that I've learned." And so I think that's the key. You got to find that passion. And when current passion ends, you got to look and see what the next passion for you is going to be. And if you can find that, then I think you're going to be okay. You're going to stay away from those negative things that a lot of people run into with alcohol, drugs, whatever else out there. But I think it all comes down to your passion.
I really like that. And I think a lot of it also is if all you do is the thing that recharges your batteries are going to explode, right? you have to be able to separate those two things, I think, in my mind. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I've got several. I'll try to limit them. So first things first, just based off of what Oak said, one of my passions, and I believe that resentment and gratitude can exist almost simultaneously. But I think there are two different operating states that can't operate identically at the same time. I think that you can move back and forth between the two states rapidly, but I don't think you can be resentful and grateful in a singular millisecond simultaneously. So I think there's a time lag there. It might be a second or two or whatever the case is, but I don't think they operate simultaneously. However, I've stated that, man, podcasting just breaks my little peanut, and it's a challenge. But one of my passions that in fact, Chance, we talked about this in the show earlier this week, where it was just you and I talking for the first time since last March. I was your guest, you were my guest. We didn't have any guests. It was weird, cats and dogs living together. Who knew? And
Mass
so,
hysteria.
mass hysteria, Bill Murray. And so, the as crazy as podcasting makes me, I'm fascinated by interesting minds. Fascinating minds fascinate me. And so this show, the collective or the Goldmine podcast, as much as I don't want to go do it, I love doing it simultaneously because it gives me access to amazing humans, fascinating minds. And I just love observing, analyzing, trying to understand other humans who have amazing brains, amazing mindsets, amazing philosophies. How they run their program is what fascinates me. So in the show, in real time, I'm always observing fascinating minds. It's a passion of mine. And so in that sense, I think they can almost interact simultaneously. So you'd asked Chance of an incident where gratitude and where these two things can exist simultaneously from military career. The first thing that came to mind was as I was jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. For a variety of reasons, my parachute candlesticked, which for any layman out there means that it's not a fully inflated parachute. It's just this pile of garbage that looks like a pillar above you. And it's not holding air. And so as I screamed through the air, not screaming like, ah, as I was moving quickly through the air, thinking, wow, what is freaking going on right now? What I did do was I bounced off of a parachute that was directly below me. And that was at about 200 feet off the deck when I bounced off that parachute. And an inflated parachute feels a bit like a brick wall. I mean, it's not like a full brick wall, but it's pretty solid. So when I bounced off of that thing, I hit it pretty hard and then went off the edge and then started hurtling to my death down to the ground again for another, couple of 100 feet. Maybe 50 feet above the deck, my parachute snapped open. And so, but I still hit super duper hard. And I was wearing full gear, full rig, rucksack weapon, and all of the heavy materials. So I hit hard enough that I blacked out, passed out. And so I came to lying on my back, and I was blinking blood out of my eyes. And so I didn't know, I just thought, wow, I wonder if my skull is smashed open. That was my first thought. And so what I did do is as a pathfinder, I always kept my compass in my left breast pocket with the compass bearing my first punch forward, that bearing set on the compass so I could hit the deck, pull out my compass, shoot, and I'd be off in the direction I needed to go. So I pulled out my compass, flipped open, looked at the mirror, and then scanned my face as I was laying there, stock still, just in case, I'd broken my spine. I didn't want to make things even worse. So I was carefully scanning my face to see what was going on. And as it turned out, it's just that I'd just broken my nose, and the nose had blown. And so I had blood all over my face. So I was beat up for sure, but I wasn't paralyzed. I wasn't looking at half of my skull laying on the ground. So I kind of went from, what the hell is going on here, man, to, wow, I'm not dead. And so these things can happen very quickly, but they didn't happen simultaneously. It went from, man, I think I'm really messed up to, I'm not that messed up, it's just a nose. And that sounds strange, but that's how, again, going back to what I'd said earlier, that's how you get context on how resentful you are of the moment or how grateful you are for the moment, is if you've been through enough times, and I'd been through some tough times prior to that, when you look at that moment, you can think of, it's pretty bad, but I've been in worse. And that's generally the thought that came to mind, Chance. I need to go to something that Brenda had said, and she was talking about how within her capacity right now, she's acting as a leader, acting as a someone who can help a younger generation through her actions, through her examples. And so the only reason that Brenda can do that, the only reason that Brenda can explain gratitude is because at some point in her life, she had to have been resentful. And I believe that to be true for anyone who's really good at understanding the subject. You've got to do the cyclical reps. It can't be just a one and done. My exact example that popped up in my head when Brenda was talking is someone sitting on a step in front of their house and they're bummed out. They need some help. And two people walk up to that person. One is Brenda, and one is a 20-year-old just out of their first year of university who's taken all the courses and has got all the academics in front of them. And they're about to launch into their ideas on gratitude and resentment. But it's from a purely book-read, poorly understood sense of how this whole game works. Brenda's done enough reps that the person on the step will respect her opinion. But for the high school student or university student stepping up on that step to give advice, they won't get much respect because they haven't been in the game long enough. They haven't done enough reps enough. They don't have enough scars. They don't have enough failures and wins to understand the totality of the game. And so that's to my last point, which is the phases of life. If in my 20s, I would have stepped up to someone and started explaining to them how gratitude and resentment works, I'm the biggest dummy in the world at that point because I don't even understand it myself, as I've already said. And so I do believe it has to come later in life where you've faced enough reps that you can put it across to someone else who's standing in front of you in a way that they will get. And not just get, but respect. Because you can deliver all you want, but until your word is valued, until your actions are respected, until the person who's receiving the message feels that you're worth listening to, it'll never sink in. And so the reps matter.
Yeah. There's nothing quite like the military or the police world that the near-death experiences that you have to go through in order to get to a point where you can be like, oh yeah, that's no big deal. Your story about bouncing off of the canopy and coming to and kind of like, oh God, okay, wait, I'm not dead. Excellent. Reminded me of a point in time. I almost got cut in half by the 25 mil Bushmaster barrel while I was in the lab, and very similar situation of like, oh God, am I dead? No, I'm not dead. Oh, sweet. Okay, I'm not dead. And there is a momentary like clicking in your head of immediate gratitude, whereas prior to that second, there was almost a level of resentment of just like, oh God, what, like this again, or this to me? Oh man, I love where this is going. Any other thoughts on this before I jump into another question? Matt, what do you got?
I just want to affirm everything that everyone has said, and especially how Sean ended it, because here's a little note that I took before we got on, rushing in the middle of a workout, thinking you were going to ask us what we're resentful about or what we're grateful for. And one of the things that I am grateful for is mentors and elders that we're not valuing in our society, that have real life experience and wisdom and have been through, quote, rites of passages and initiations. And there's a movie from the 80s I just finished watching that a Vietnam veteran told me to watch called Emerald Forest. And it actually goes through what the stages are of initiation. But we're in this culture where people want the younger people, as Sean's talking about, they shouldn't have that much credibility, but they're jumping online with information telling you how to fix your problem before they even heard your life story. And everybody's a wannabe guru or healer or coach of some sort, rather than the Brendas and the Oaks, like, that are probably not jumping on Instagram. But people are starving and in vulnerable places and don't want to go back to what Brenda said, is doing the work, and it's not easy work. So people want to hear the person on Instagram that's young and spits out some information that I can cure your trauma or heal you or get you ripped or jacked without all the hard work. So it's just an interesting space in our culture right now, because the technology in part has shifted who we're taking the, quote, wisdom from. And I think we need to be vetting who we get our information from more.
That's a fantastic point. Brenda, what do you got?
Yeah, I just want to dovetail on that, because when I hear, the taking wisdom from elders. So one of the observations that I've had over the last probably 18 to 24 months, and you can appreciate that I work with a lot of elders, they're resentful. Like there's a lot of resentment that youth and the other generations are not taking time to sit and hear and listen to their wisdom. And so, the shift that we're trying to make, and, with myself as well, is to sit with them and actually have more programming and initiatives where the youth can sit and speak to elders. And it's a fascinating dynamic, because you have youth who obviously are going through life at the speed of light, and trying to get them to slow down a little bit and just, sit. And sometimes with the elders, you're sitting in silence. Like you're not actually sharing stories of any type. It's a matter of sitting calmly and quietly and just absorbing their energy as well. And those life lessons are critical. And so, that's, as much as our elders have always demonstrated gratitude, it's the fact that they're sort of living in a resentful type of environment right now, where they're emitting that, like they're emoting that, and trying to find that balance again with, bringing all the different generations together so we can sit in harmony. Because the interconnectedness is critical for us. And, that's, I think, one of the spin-offs when you have all this information coming or available, whether it's fact-checked or not, whether it's evidence-based or not, that, different individuals grasp to, or they, migrate to. And yet they're forgetting those that have had a tremendous amount of history and knowledge and life experiences themselves.
That is a fantastic point. Oak, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in my father's bar for about 2 years while I was going through college. And there were 3 guys that came in there almost every time I worked. And, they were World War II veterans. And one was airborne, made 4 combat jumps in World War II. One was had made 3 beach landings in World War II. And the only reason he didn't make 4 is because he was wounded in Sicily, so he couldn't land in Italy. Got well just in time to go D-Day, and lived through all 3 of them. And then one had ridden across Europe in Patton's Third Army. And the stories that they could tell you, not just the war stories, no, those were interesting in themselves, but just the life experience that they had. And, the sad part was that most people didn't listen. And we didn't capture it. We're not capturing those stories, life stories of many of these great people that could teach us lots about life. So I think what Brenda is saying is absolutely true. We got to get back to sitting, and we got to encourage the younger generation to sit and listen to these life stories of people. And it doesn't have to be war. It doesn't have to be police work. Just everybody has a life story and some lessons they can pass on to somebody else if they're just willing to listen. And one of the things I am very adamant about in my leadership talk is have a mentor, be a mentor. Just like, Brenda, I don't care how high up you get, you still need a mentor. You still need somebody to bounce ideas off of and to get ideas from. And then it's your job, your responsibility, like where I am in my life, and Brenda and Matt, where we're now we're the mentors passing on those things to the next group as well. And you got to take that responsibility. You got to really take that to heart, because it is your responsibility to do that as much as the next generation will listen.
That's a great point, Sean. What do you got? I saw you sidle up the mic.
Yeah. Just a quick one. So, first of all, I'd love to say this, that I would have paid anything to sit next to those 3 guys and listen to their stories.
Same here.
And not just their stories, because again, I love the mind. I love the interplay between minds. And so I would have paid to sit there silently and watch those 3 guys rib each other. Because the airborne guy's kind of chirping at the guy who had to land on the beach. And the guy who's landing on the beach had to chirp at the guy who had to take the convoy. The guy in the convoy is chirping about the guy who had to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. They've been doing it most of their life, ribbing on each other, having a good laugh, playing it up for what it is, for all of the goodness that it is. And so what they would have found, I believe, and when I'm finished, maybe Oki can confirm or deny any of this, that through the hellacious phase of their life that they existed in World War II, they were able to sit in a bar as three chums and chirp about the good times, chirp about their good times together in that bar. Even when they're chirping at each other, they're doing it with the right intentions, with the good vibes of it. And so they came from a place where they could have been extremely resentful for what they had to face and what society hasn't done for them and how they haven't got their recognition and how the woe is me and victim mindset and et cetera, right through to I'll see you at the tavern at 3:00 this afternoon. And they found a way to have perhaps a simple or simpler life that was focused on being with chums. And I love that, man, because I could have gone in a completely different direction, of course. But what was happening in that moment, as I see it, is those guys were always going to do their thing. They're not looking to mentor Oak. But the ripple-on effect or the tertiary impact is that they didn't show up at the tavern every day to drill wisdom into Oak. They were there. It was for Oak to pick up what they were putting down. It was for Oak to, as he was cleaning the bar in front of them, fake cleaning so that he could just hang out a little bit longer and maybe catch a word or two of wisdom, or not. He could have leaned against the wall and pulled out his iPhone, if iPhones would have been a thing in the day, and just goofed off and not paid attention to the world around him. And so Oak, I believe, would have gotten involved in that, maybe a little bit of chirping back and forth with the troops there to see how they react to the young buck who's pretending to clean the bar. That's for Oak to figure out, but it's also for those guys to figure out as well. And that's our job to figure out now as perhaps later in the phase of life as elders or as older, wiser people, I'll call it. It's not the younger generation's job to figure us out. Well, it is, but they might not. So it's our job to figure them out and head it in their direction now, to push it out in their direction. And I feel that we just actually, as a generation, we don't do a very good job of it. We're not that appealing. We're not that sexy. We're not that together. We're not very good with technology. We're not very good with a lot of things when it comes to a 20-year-old who's fascinated with their iPhone. So it's our job to figure out how to become more fascinating, I believe. And maybe you guys have got some ideas on that. Maybe we don't. But we shouldn't just and I know we're not, but we shouldn't just sit back and rest on our laurels of, we made it to 60. Freaking congratulations. We're supposed to push our pace a little bit more and figure out how to do it better, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think this is the secondary question I have for you guys, or at least a thought that I have. I remember your story, Oak, really clicked in the back of my head. I have a memory from the ranch of watching my granddad and my dad and my uncles and them just kind of sitting on horseback chatting as, the hay bales were being picked up or they were moving cattle or whatever it was. But it was this sense of camaraderie. It was like oral history from way back in the day of being able to just share their lives with each other and laugh and joke, and no one's telling stories about, how many head of cattle I moved last year. That's not the issue. Same thing with probably the war stories from the older generation there. They don't go back and say, oh, how many mag changes I did? How many times I was no, we don't. When we get together, we rarely engage in those stories. What we start talking about is the hilarities, the dumb things that happen, the craziness of just a life lived. And it was similar on horseback back in the day. And I think that's what needs to be brought forward to the generation now, is that my kids pick up the most information when I tell them a story rather than when I'm lecturing them on a topic. Right. And it's not about me being wiser or more informed or have more experience. It's just the fact that I think kids pick up more from a really good story. And that's the direction that I want to, at least for myself, I want to be able to tell a really good story consistently. So I'm wondering, the question I have for you guys is, how do we redevelop that oral history? How do we redevelop that connection to the younger generation, especially when it comes to resentment and gratitude? Because those things are not as well defined for the younger generation as they used to be. Brenda, I'm going to come to you first. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I come from a culture of oral history. Like that's technically how we share our heritage. The different lessons and teachings, they're shared through oral history. I mean, we've obviously taken time to write it down and digitized it, but overall, growing up in an environment with my grandparents always talking about, different experiences that they had, and the elders that I have the opportunity to spend time with. And so, like a small story, my grandfather used to run dogs, and he did that. He did some patrolling with the Northwest Mounted Police years and years and years ago. However, in the summertime, and he lived in 12 Mile, which is down from the community where I'm currently living, so 12 miles down or upriver, and he would come up. But, obviously, they lived a very simple but complex life, and so they didn't have a lot of money available. And what he would do is he would hook his dogs to his riverboat, and instead of running the engine to save on gas, that the dogs would pull him up the shoreline. And when he actually had to cross the river, he'd put the dogs in the river and then cross the river, put them back out on the shoreline, and they would continue up until they reached the community of Dawson. And so, being fiscally responsible, obviously that was part of it, but also, ingenious in the way that he would think about doing things, and those lessons were taught to others. And so I'm not saying that he's the one that came up with that initial idea. It's the fact that, those are the stories that we share, and it's all of the teachings that you learn within that story itself. And so, and my dad is an incredible storyteller. And, aside from, well, Brenda, you always have to have a plan, his mind is incredible, and just all the experiences that he's had. So whether he was, out working with forestry, or if he was skimming logs, or if he was mining, or, all the different handy things that he's been involved in, like the influence that he's had. And then I think about, myself and a recent individual that I spoke to. And so he's a young man, and he was feeling quite a bit of resentment with respect to government. And I wouldn't say he was entirely anti-government, but I would say that, there was definitely some challenges, and he felt like he was very disenfranchised and not connected to the community. And despite having grown up in the community and worked, within the First Nations for so many years, that he just didn't feel like he was well supported. And so when he was sitting and chatting with me, and he was, making some, and again, his perspective, but some inflammatory comments regarding different individuals. And I said, like, having been somebody who was born and raised in the community and comes from multiple generations on both sides of my family, my mom and my dad, I said, I've myself witnessed so many atrocities. I've witnessed so many other different experiences, including having lived them. And I've lost multiple cousins because he was talking about an individual that he was related to that had committed suicide. And I explained to him that, we all have these experiences, but it's what we do with them. And, at the end of this discussion of 60 to 90 minutes, and much longer than that, but on that particular occasion, like, he walked away and he said to me, he goes, I really appreciate you sharing those experiences with me. And I think really where I'm going with this is, he came from such a resentful type of situation to a point where he realized, okay, well, there's there's the commonalities and those shared experiences and being able to talk about them, and then, you know, how that individual chose to look at things differently, but also take more control over his life and not, you know, sit in a victim mentality, but become more of a warrior, which is what we're trying to grow. So my point is, I think that spending time hearing stories and listening to others, we learn incredible and valuable points, and that whether we choose to adopt them within our own life experiences, we're still learning. And I think that's the point that I was making much earlier, is about being curious, always being curious about others, as well as, you know, the different experiences that, you know, individually we gain.
Love that. Thank you. Oak, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. Because you're absolutely right. People learn from stories. When I'm giving my leadership talk, you know, I talk about these principles that, you know, integrity, selfless service, you got to be able to communicate. But they don't, that's not what they remember from my talk. They remember the stories I use to emphasize, to reinforce those principles. That's what they remember. And I know that's true because when they come up to me after the talk, that's what they'll talk about. They won't talk about, well, you said to be a good communicator, you got to do these 5 things. That's not what they talk about, the story that I use to hammer that home. So that's absolutely true. And I think to go back to what Brenda was talking about, you know, the differences, you know, how young people have a lot of grievance about a lot of things. And, you know, one of the things that I always hear is how tough it is as a 20, 21, 22-year-old out there in the real world. And I think that the way to, you know, it doesn't do any good to say, well, everybody has it tough. Nobody's going to listen to that because they don't care. But if you can tell them what it was like when you were 20 years old and how it wasn't much different than what it is now, then they understand. You know, one of the things I always used when I would run into that situation is, you know, my wife and I, both in the Army, lieutenants in the Army, our first coffee table was milk crates with a towel over it. I mean, you know, so you look at my house now, and that's what those kids look at now. They look at the house that their parents live in now, but what kind of a house did their parents live in when they were that age? And so you got to relate that to them through the stories. And if you can do that, I think now you can start to get them to understand a little bit better. But just telling them something, you're wasting your breath.
That's a fantastic point, Matt. You got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I got all kinds of notes from Brenda and Oak. I can, you know, what you said. So thank you so much, Brenda and Oak. Like, it is true that stories stick more than information or PowerPoints, like Oak was just saying. So do images, anything that's symbolic, analogies, and metaphors. Those are things that stick with the psyche or the soul and that people remember. So it's super important to share stories. Also, and in their own ways, Brenda and Oak also brought up how, you know, like Brenda was talking about commonalities and shared experiences. And Oak was talking about when you speak to somebody, don't tell them how tough it was when you were 20. Talk about things that you can be relatable to when you were 20. And this is called non-dual thinking or non-dual spirituality. Right now, we live in a world of black and white divisiveness. It's this or that. But honestly, as we grow in life experience, we should be able to see what we have more in common with other human beings and build bridges through that, rather than I wear this uniform and you work this job. I voted for this person, you voted for that person. I'm in this socioeconomic class, you're in another one, or you're in a different political party. But that's what like mainstream like media and politicians and a lot of like leaders are doing, is trying to get people stirred up against each other rather than building bridges of what we have in common. So I'm just so appreciative for everybody on this panel. I have so many notes that I didn't get to go over, but you're all speaking so many truths, and I'm so grateful for everyone here.
Yeah. Can I hop in there, Sean?
Give her.
Matt, you're absolutely right. And when I talk about, because it is decisive right now, and just pick a topic. It doesn't have to be religion. It doesn't have to be politics. Just pick a topic, and it's so decisive. And it shouldn't be. because we do have much more in common than we have different. But we start, because we've been taught that way by the media, by whoever, to start with what we have different. And when you do that, you're never going to get to what you have in common. If you start with what you have in common and work out, then you can start dealing with those little differences that you have, or big differences, and start trying to bring them closer together. Never going to get them to the same, because we're all human, but might be able to get them close enough where we don't have that decisiveness. That's a great point, Matt.
Love that. Sean, got any thoughts on any of this? Oh, you're muted still. You're still muted. He's hitting all the buttons. There it is.
We go. This is for my boys in the future, because they probably aren't aware of this, but it's building off of Oak's point. My very first furniture was some beer cases as the coffee table, empty beer cases, by the way, with no towel on top. And my seat was a milk crate. So that's where I started. And now we live in a nice house, and our boys are used to the niceties of the fruits of our labor, as it were. And they understand that my wife and I worked hard, and, we've served our community and all of that good stuff. But they don't know, the devil is in the details, as they say, and they don't know the details. And they know the general scope, but they don't understand the nitty gritty of how I came up. That's for sure. They know not a lot about my special operations or my military career, very little at all, actually. And so they don't know how much sweat, blood, and tears it was. But it's a fine balance between putting across the grittiness of it and your kids just stop listening because they don't want to hear another boring, gritty story from dad. And so there's a line for everyone where the story has to be told well, or correct, or synchronous to the moment. And so what I was thinking about was Brenda talking about elders and her dad and how he was a great storyteller. Well, there's two kinds of storytellers, to keep it simple, in my opinion. There's the person who can lean against a wall with their hands in their pocket and tell a great story. And then there's the person who has a frickin' PowerPoint presentation. And we know what the PowerPoint presentation does. It puts everyone to sleep, because it's not irrelevant, perhaps, but it's certainly not personal. It's certainly not relevant to the person who's putting across the PowerPoint presentation, because it's become corporate to some degree. And I find that a lot of the stories out there, we'll call it the weekly safety briefing, guaranteed it's a freaking PowerPoint presentation. It's got very little to do with the person who's giving the safety briefing. It's just another boring time to shut my mind down, shut my eyes, pretend that I'm paying attention, because there's no personal wisdom in the moment. It's a corporate moment. And I think a lot of kids face a lot of corporate moments from adults, where we're trying to deliver the PowerPoint presentation through a verbal story. We aren't doing the actual storytelling well. And I've been told, in fact, before I started podcasting, I was told by a very good friend of mine, Tim Turner's wife, Karen, said, Sean, whatever you do, just tell stories, because you're a good storyteller. And so I didn't know what she meant. And I've been thinking about that for near 2 years now. And I'm still trying to get better at telling stories. But there's a balance between telling a good story and trying to make your point. And they don't always often line up. And so I'm still trying to do it better. And I think that anyone in the latter phases of their life where they're trying to pass on wisdom, you should consider delivering the wisdom within a well-crafted story. And that doesn't mean a contrived story. Just as I told the story about the candlestick bouncing off the chute, hitting the deck, waking up, blood all over my face, that was a brief moment that I could have built out for 20 minutes to make a whole pile of points. But it's my job to figure out the synchronicity of the moment, the point that I need to make, but wrap a decent story around it so people can sink their teeth into it rather than fall asleep.
And I think to that point, Sean, each audience that you're telling that story to will need a different piece to it. It isn't the same story. You know, when I talk about leadership, I use lots of different stories. It never use the same stories because it's all based on the audience, and that, as the storyteller, need to figure out what that audience needs.
That is a fantastic point. I think the interesting part about being a storyteller in general is the fact that it's not an innate thing, right? There are people that kind of have talent for the ability to, how they use their voice, how they communicate, their body languages, all these things. But storytelling is a practiced skill. It's not something that you can very
It
easily just
used to be.
mm,
It
go on.
used to be, but it isn't anymore. And why is that? Why aren't people good at telling stories nowadays in a younger generation? Because they don't need to, because the story's right there in their hand. There it is. You get to absorb stories, you get to make up stories that are brief. A 3-second clip on TikTok, a 5-second post on Pinterest, a 12-second whatever. Those aren't stories. These aren't story thinking. That isn't immersion in story. That is just, we know it for what it is. That's just input output. It's not reflection. It's not thoughtful. It's not building a person up. It's holding them back. And so the art of story was a thing. It used to be painted on walls. And now it's painted on phones, except the difference is the people who are painting on the phones aren't giving it as much thought as people who used to paint it on a rock.
I'm gonna come back at you a little bit. Is that there? We have lots of examples of storytellers, of painters, of poets, of playwrights, of things that were successful and have lasted the test of time. But I'm gonna postulate this to you guys. I think there were just as many people making stupid limericks back in the day as there are now making stupid TikToks. I don't think I don't think this is a new feature in terms of life. I think there are lots of there have been consistent examples that just haven't lasted the test of time that you can go back and say, "Oh, well, yeah, there were dumb people back then too."
Perhaps. But here is the important distinction, buddy, is back in the day, there were consequences if you listened to the idiot who said, don't be scared of bears. Whereas nowadays, the consequences aren't as impactful. I can write up a little thing on my phone in about 15 seconds that says, bears are your best friends, and that's why you should always take a big jar of honey when you're petting them on the head out in the bush. Like, I can put that out in 15 seconds, guaranteed. 5 out of 100 people will believe that, and they'll go buy a jar of honey. And so the consequences of the moment are different nowadays than they were back then. I can spit out that story and then shrug my shoulders and laugh and walk down my driveway and never give it another thought. But several hundred years ago, someone was getting eaten by a bear. And then that word comes back to the campfire, and guess who's going to get it? I'm going to get it. I'm going to face the consequences of me saying to someone, go pet the bear. Consequentially, they're different times, I believe.
Oh, that's a great point. Matt, go for it.
Well, I completely agree with Sean. And there's other circumstances, like there used to be consequences for crimes. There used to be consequences for being the idiot that opened your mouth. Because even as a kid growing up in a town called Hartville, Ohio, or going to Beaver County, Pennsylvania, if some dad was popping off and was an egomaniac and an idiot, some other dad would frickin' punch him in the face or hold him against the wall. And he was put in his place, and nobody called the cops. And if the cops came, they'd probably say that guy's a punk and frickin' deserved it. So things were a lot different. And I think I would agree, because I think technology has allowed people to prey on the vulnerability of people wanting quick fix answers and not going back to Brenda, doing the work, and it's hard work. We're kind of all collectively saying this. And it's a story. It's good storytelling and good role modeling. Like, I'll throw out, I keep, people will be online, they'll be ripped and say, pay me this money and I'll teach you how to eat and get ripped. And it's like, hey, Joker, you probably have great genetics, like living in Los Angeles for 15 years or training NFL guys. Some of the NFL guys that had the best abs drank beer every night, smoked weed, ate McDonald's, and hated working out. And they were still first-round draft picks. But people see that online and pay the money to get abs or ripped or heal their PTSD real quick. So, and there's no consequences, and people are getting rich off of it.
That's a great point. There are a lot. I guess perhaps the statement is that there will always be idiots. But there's a great comment here. Winterstorm jumped on and he said, everyone now has a cave and gallons of pain. I think this is a great point to it. But any other thoughts? Oak, you got any thoughts on this?
I think everybody kind of hit that one. I think that it is technology, double-edged sword. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation if it wasn't for technology. So, I mean, it certainly has its good points, but it certainly has its bad points. And I absolutely agree with Sean that that's why nobody tells stories anymore. That they don't even talk. A lot of kids don't even talk to another person. All they do is text and the TikTok, whatever other apps they use out there. That's all. That's how they talk to people. They don't even talk to real humans, and they don't want to. And so we've broken that cycle of the way you learned was listening to your parents, listening to elders tell the story of the lessons they learned by doing something stupid, or the lessons they learned from doing something well that helped them get where they are today. And now that cycle's been broken, and kids today, a lot of them don't even want to listen to that.
That's a great point. Brenda, you got any thoughts on this?
It's certainly contributed to an erosion of critical analysis, right? Like fact checking and, really discerning what's fake versus what's reality. And I think that because there's such an immediate gratification, right? You're online, you're being impacted by, social media, whatever that looks like, whatever form it takes. There's nobody really verifying the reality of what's being stated. And so I do think that, not only has that led to the erosion of oral storytelling, but also just the critical analysis that most, or, people generally should be utilizing. Evidence-based decision making, right? So how are you informing yourself in the best way possible to make good, sound decisions, and actually reviewing the totality of a situation before, you jump to a conclusion or make any kind of a conclusion. So it's definitely, a loss on many levels, but I also think that, there's a great space in order to recapture it. And frankly, those that have been in leadership positions or are up and coming leaders, like, you have a responsibility to ensure that you're creating that space and providing opportunities, again, for others to, share their experiences as well as find that commonality. It was interesting too, when you were talking about the divisiveness, I was kind of chuckling because I literally this morning, we had this 15-year long outstanding issue that we were able to finally resolve. And it caused a considerable amount of divisiveness just within the community. But, we had the right people at the table this morning and we were able to put it to bed. So it was a great win. Anyway, side note.
Love that. Interesting enough, I got a really great comment on this. What do you got, Sean?
So really quick, thinking about that, the idea of communication and technology and a younger generation now that isn't used to sitting around a campfire and listening to stories and providing their questions or input or nuance to the conversation that will go on for 2 or 3 hours. Let's forget about that ever happening in the future, because we're on the cusp right now. Actually, we're just beyond, we've crossed the threshold right now of the ability for someone to grab their phone, ask a question, and then continue for another hour having a conversation with artificial intelligence. So a live AI agent, so that's an impersonal, that's not a person. It's a robot, we'll call it, the robot is going to have that hour-long conversation with you, and it is going to talk to you as fast as you can talk to it. It can think faster than you can think, and it can probably think wider and deeper than you can consider if you're asking the right questions. So one of the things that occurs is the feedback loop on the conversation with AI, with the model, can become so intriguing or appealing or fascinating or curious to certain individuals. The requirement to talk to an actual human being is less than being able to talk to an AI agent. And so if no one is really, and I'm not talking to anyone on the panel, I'm talking to anyone who's listening to this later, if you haven't interacted with a live LLM or a large language model in a live chat back and forth, it's like talking to a really, really smart human being, except it's not providing you any wisdom. What it is doing is it's providing you ones and zeros. It's providing you data. And you should never think of interacting with an AI agent as interacting with a human ever, because it isn't. And so we're about to branch off into an entire different arena of non-wisdom. That's just food for thought. I'd like to throw this separate subject out, or different idea, talking about gratitude and resentment. Well, what's the metric? How does a person evaluate if they suck at gratitude and they're the world champion in resentment? Well, I think it comes down to how much healing and forgiveness you have going on in your life. So if you don't feel like you're healing, or you can't forgive other people for whatever reason, chances are you've got a little bit too much resentment and maybe not enough gratitude. And so as a metric, if you want to know where you are between those two polar opposites or mutually exclusive positions, don't worry about thinking on the intensity of resentment that you have. Change your script and think about how much forgiveness you've got going on at the moment. If you feel like you're in a healing process, well, congratulations. Now you've got some gratitude on the go. But if all of a sudden that healing feels like it's come to a halt, or it's even backsliding, chances are you've dialed up your resentment. And what is resentment? Resentment is that re-feeling of a feeling that you had back in the day where you were super angry about whatever. And the biggest, or wrong, the most potent re-feeling is rumination. So if you drop into a ruminating cycle, well, now you're in maximum resentment, perhaps. And so how to understand where you're at? If you're having constant angry thoughts about the one thing that guy, he never put mustard in my takeout bag when I was leaving the drive-through window. If that's all you've thought about today, you got to get a grip. You got to get a grip. You got to think about why you're thinking about mustard 1,000 times today. Drop that stuff. Focus on something a little bit bigger, cooler, fun. Like, how do I help other people around me? How can I serve my neighbor? How can I serve my family? How can I serve my country? Think about bigger, macro, more impactful things that will take you out of your little minutia rumination into a more globally focused aspect, so that a few days later you can look back and think, what the hell was I focused on mustard for? That was dumb. And so healing and forgiveness is a great metric to understand where you are at on the spectrum between gratitude and resentment.
This is a great spot. This will probably lead us down an entirely another rabbit hole in terms of the conversation, and I'm sure we could probably go for another couple hours. So, we are running a little short on time. I want to use Sean's question as in, what do you guys think would be a good metric for people out there to understand or develop their sense of gratitude / resentment. And I want to use that kind of as our final thoughts for the day, because we've crossed a number of different topics here, from oral history and all these other things. But what do you guys think would be the metric that either you would recommend or you use yourself? And we'll use that as our kind of our final thought for the day. So Matt, let's start with you. What do you got?
Well, one, I took so many notes on everything Sean just said. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. So I hope people out there, got a chance to capture some of that and they process and digest it. As far as a metric, something that I'll throw this out so it'll probably be more unique. But it is something that indicates where you might have resentment versus gratitude, and that is your heart rate variability. So if people want to get an Oura ring, and I'm assuming you get those in Canada too. All right, Sean's holding his up. And if you look up the Heart Math Institute, they do research on heart rate variability, and they can relate it to emotions and hormones. Are you recharging your battery, draining your battery? We do need self-reflection practices that we've talked about and Oak's talked about, Brenda's talked about. Self-reflection practices as well as self-regulation practices that turn on the parasympathetic nervous system, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, yoga, journaling practices. And if you can afford it, get yourself an Oura ring. It'll measure your heart rate variability. It'll measure your deep and your REM sleep. And it'll measure your daytime stress in categories of restoration, relaxed, engaged, or stressed. And if you're ruminating or angry and have a lot of things going on, you're going to see your heart rate variability suffers, which influences your hormones, your decision making, and your battery recharge. And if you're having gratitude and training your parasympathetic nervous system through art or playing music or the breath work or the meditation or the yoga or 1,000 other things, you're going to see your heart rate variability improve and more restoration and recharging your battery. But even without the ring, if you reflect at the end of every day, these are the people, places, and things I encountered. These were my interactions. Where did I feel recharged and where did I feel drained? And then reflect on the thoughts and feelings around those different interactions. Have the insight to grow and learn a lesson even from the ones that might have been draining. And then ask yourself and have the intention, how can I handle this situation better the next time?
Love that. Love it. Oak, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to go with what Sean said, forgiveness. I mean, that's one of the things that when I was younger, that wasn't in my vocabulary. It just wasn't. And now as I'm getting a little older, I'm realizing that the little things that I held resentment toward people for really didn't matter and doesn't matter. And so now it's about forgiveness. Me offering forgiveness to people who I held who did something to me that I held resentment for, and me asking forgiveness from people that I at some point offended or gave them a reason to hold resentment. And the thing you got to remember about forgiveness is that it's yours to give. Somebody can't take it from you, and you can't take it from somebody else. You either have to give it to somebody or they have to give it to you when you ask for it. So I think that one of the things that, the Bible talks about forgiveness, and, most religions talk about that. So I think that is, to me, the key. If you're at the point in your life where you're forgiving people and asking for forgiveness from people, then you're probably on the right track.
Love it. Love it. Brenda, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a few. I definitely think that the forgiveness is a big part of it. I think that humility, right? And, finding humor in the situation, depending upon what it is and the appropriateness of it. I think that, situations are going to happen. They just are, right? And it's how you view it and being able to see it through not only your own lens, but the others that are involved in the situation as well, like seeing something through another person's lens. And, I come back to forgiveness a little bit. I mean, you don't even necessarily have to forgive the individual involved in it. it's the forgiveness that maybe your own behaviors, and maybe you didn't extend that to the other person, but that you've been able to reconcile what's transpired in a way that's positive, in a way that, you can move beyond it without harboring any kind of ill will or feelings, or continue to project, that situation or your own feelings onto another individual. I think that, as we've spoken about, introspection, reflection is a critical component of it. I also think that connection and, forming connections that are meaningful, and that, and it could be as connections with the land, like connections with being out and going for a walk. And, it feeds into the mindfulness, it feeds into the meditation piece, it feeds into all those components. But I think those are all critical. And I also am going to say this, because it took me a long time to reconcile this within my own mind. But, the extension of love, like, you don't have to like the situation necessarily, but it's about, extending that love to your fellow human beings, and recognizing that we all have our nuances, our differences, but at the same time, we can find that commonality that I spoke about earlier. So those are, I think, the things that, I've learned, and that thrust me into more of a gratitude lifestyle, and being committed to that on a daily basis.
Yeah. I really love what everybody said so far. For myself, I think I always go with exploration, being able to explore things um, without recoiling from them. That was my big turnaround point for me, that I realized, was the fact that I was able to go back into my memory and go, oh, okay, that this particular thing happened. I was resentful of it. Interesting. Why was I resent? And I was able to explore that feeling, that memory more. Whereas when I was highly resentful of it, no, the memory would come up and I'd try to shut it off, or try to push it away, or try to not deal with it in some way. But the ability to explore your own thoughts and feelings and so on and so forth, I think, is at least my metric. That's the one that I use consistently throughout. Now, Sean, what do you got?
Yeah. So just in case you were going to ask me what I thought, I'll give you my opinion. So Matt, with the Oura Ring, I've had it nearly 7 years now. And what it's allowed me to do is, of course, capture all of the data and all of the things that you stated. So we both understand how the ring works. But there's the other aspect to it. The simple act of wearing this and studying it every 24-hour cycle means that I have agency. I have control of understanding who I am. So do I give my agency away, or do I own my own agency as much as I can? And so, given that this is an option for everyone, now obviously it costs money, but it depends on where you want to spend your money, which is indicative of how much you want to control your own agency. So, do you want to understand yourself or not? And if you do want to understand yourself, the simple act of looking into buying an Oura ring is, to some degree, increasing your sense of personal agency. And so this acts as a proxy for me, in the sense that I am studying me. I want the best for me. And by wanting the best for me, it means that I get to give the best to everyone else around me. So, irrespective of what drives you, if you are all about you being the center of the universe, okay, a thing like this is all about you. Or if you're all about serving the greater community around you, guess what? This is all about serving the greater good around me, because I'm trying to do my best for everyone else around me. So choose which position a person wants to be in, center of the universe or serving the community. A proxy like this will help you understand how much you are in the game. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, when I take a look at the panel, of course, we all have our methodologies, our strategies, our ways to understand what the metric is between resentment and gratitude. I think the cheapest, simplest, but perhaps the most difficult tool we all have available to us right now. And it's hilarious that, as Matt was, just before he went to describe the Oura ring, I thought he was going to steal my secret. because he started the sentence with, he had a little smile, and then he launched into the Oura ring, and I thought, whew, all right, now I get to drop my mic. And it's the smile. The smile is the greatest metric for someone to be able to improve their life. So at times I'm a pretty stoic guy. Sometimes I've got my arms folded and I'm looking pretty stern. And that can like put people off. When I'm walking down a sidewalk, if I've got my game face on, I'm not looking overly friendly. But it's my job to flip the script. It's my job to like dial up being available to everyone around me. And a smile is the best thing that you can invoke in those situations. And so if you're walking through the world with a sneer on your face 24/7, chances are you don't have a whole pocket full of gratitude. So no matter your circumstances, sometime today, make an effort to smile, and not just at yourself in a mirror, but go out to the coffee shop and smile at someone else and see where it takes you. Chances are you might feel a little bit more gratitude by the end of the day.
Bam. Chances are. I love this. And I just want to say before we get into any of the final stuff here, but thank you guys. This has been a fantastic conversation. I am full of gratitude in this moment, being able to hang out with you guys and really discuss this at a much deeper level, on a much more nuanced level, and being able to go on these tangents and being able to touch this piece and that piece. And it's just been a fantastic conversation. So thank you guys. It's been awesome. Now I want to hit up some of these comments that have been really good. They were hilarious at the time. I didn't want to hijack the conversation. So Winterstorm jumped in here early on. He says chipmunk moments, the collective t-shirt idea. To give you a good one. Grey Dad Gear jumped in here. He said gratitude, being thankful and appreciating the opportunity to reflect on making things better for yourself and those around you. That's a great definition of it. Winterstorm jumped in. He said policing is chaotic monotony. I think that's a good way of putting it for sure. Great Ed Gear jumped back in. He said resentment, looking back on lost opportunities you or others failed to rise to the occasion. I like it. The moments you did not do your best. Winterstorm said, I have felt gratitude and resentment at the same time when I had children. I couldn't have been happier, but mourned in a way the freedom I thought I had lost, which is, again, great little point there. He said, I ended up being grateful to start a new chapter in my life and was not resentful as I thought I was for leaving anything behind. Beautiful point. Lisa jumped in here. Grateful being here, listening to all of you. Another great podcast with amazing people. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Lisa. Grateful for this panel and their time. Resentful, it has to end. Thanks, Winterstorm. And then he says, people want answers, not knowledge. And he specifies that knowledge is the beginning of the journey, while an answer is the end. Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great point there. So I can't thank you guys enough. This has been fantastic. And, I think this is the new piece. This is the only piece that I want to end on, is that podcasting is the new oral history. I think that this is what we're doing. This is what Sean and I are trying to do, at least with podcasting, is to reinvigorate the storyteller, reinvigorate the ability to dive into these conversations. And hopefully everybody here, I know I have definitely done this, but I hope everyone else can say that they've learned, they can build upon what we've learned today and then grow from it every single day. So I really appreciate it. Thank you all. We'll see you all next week.
Chimo.